Good afternoon. The local economy performed better than was expected in the first quarter of this year. Statistics South Africa data shows that GDP increased by 1.9% in the quarter, following an increase of 1.4% in the last quarter of last year. The manufacturing sector recorded impressive growth, with major contribution coming from the petroleum, chemical products and plastic products division. Growth was also recorded in the trade, catering and accommodation industries, as well as finance and real estate sectors. The agriculture sector grew by 0.8%, mainly due to increased production of horticulture products. The mining sector contracted by just over 1%, with decreased production reported for platinum group metals, iron ore and gold. Household consumption expenditure increased, with the largest contributions to growth reported for durable goods, non-durable goods and services. Better economic performance was boosted by relaxed lockdown restrictions in the quarter. The headwinds that the local economy continues to face include the electricity supply constraints, other structural impediments hindering growth. It's expected the rising inflation and interest rates will have a dampening effect to growth as they limit consumers' spending ability. Let's get more on the story now. I'm joined by Dr. Azar Jammine. He's the Chief Economist at Econometrix. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. So we saw that GDP figure growing by 1.9% for a second consecutive quarter. Is this cause for celebration, even if it's a cautious one?
No, I don't think it's a cause for celebration. I think all it does is tell us that the economy is not collapsing completely. But one must bear in mind that a lot of negative developments took place in the second quarter that we are in right now, including the floods in KwaZulu-Natal and including intensified load shedding, both of which, and on top of that, we've had big increases in fuel prices that are eroding disposable income. And we had further increases in interest rates. So I don't think one should celebrate the first quarter figures. It was nice that we did reasonably well during that quarter, but one must expect economic growth to have slid during the second quarter.
Okay. Dr. Jammine, one of the main drivers of growth was manufacturing in quarter one. What do we know about what was driving that sharp jump in output?
One must bear in mind that we're coming off a very low base, and so part of this is basically just reflecting economic recovery. But we also saw a resumption of some of the activities that were interrupted last year by the looting spree and the difficulties that we had at ports to transport goods. Again, though, we are likely to find that in the second quarter, we will have had negative effects. We also didn't have that much industrial unrest during the first quarter, which we have experienced now in the second quarter.
We also saw finance, agriculture, business services, and even Statistics South Africa itself contributing to growth in quarter one. Just talk to us about that.
Generally speaking, I mean, the economy is not collapsing. We have come out of lockdown. We've come off a very low base. So all that we're seeing is some return to normality, especially not only lockdowns, but we also had a horrific period of social unrest during the third quarter of last year. And so what we saw was a gradual recovery, first in the fourth quarter and then in the first quarter of this year. And with the lockdowns having been lifted, one must recall that a year earlier, we had some significant lockdowns on people being able to visit coastal areas. That was not present in the first quarter of this year. So one, again, was comparing against a low base of activity a year earlier.
We saw construction and mining contracting in the first quarter. What was happening there?
This is one of the unfortunate conclusions to draw from these latest figures, and that is that a lot of the heartland of the South African economy is still not doing particularly well. Our services have picked up, but mining and infrastructural investment has been lagging badly behind. Instead, what we saw was quite a nice pickup of investment in machinery and equipment, not investment in building and construction works, infrastructural projects. which provide services. So, the balance of the economy is unfortunately still going in the wrong direction.
Okay. Dr. Jammine, I know you've spoken about the low base that we're coming from and a lot of the figures that we're seeing just being as a result of the opening up and not in particular any large sign of growth. Statistics South Africa talking about household consumption, that increasing as well, 1.4%. Hospitality sector also a sharp jump up, 6.5%. Can you talk to us about that? And if you're going to speak about the contraction that we may see in the second quarter, what may happen later?
Well, consumption expenditure itself has been relatively better off than other areas of the economy, consumption activity, because interest rates have remained well below where they were a few years ago. Now, that is starting to reverse itself. Also, inflation was relatively low a quarter ago. That is also changing now with the rise in food and fuel prices that we're experiencing in the wake of the Ukrainian war, and in the wake of increases in inflation worldwide. So I think one should expect even the growth in consumer spending to start slowing. What does depress one about the economy from a longer-term point of view, however, and has been a problem for several years, is that consumer spending keeps increasing faster than investment. And that is unsustainable from a longer-term point of view. It means the economy is becoming ever more dependent upon imports rather than on local production, and it's not conducive towards domestic employment creation.
When we speak about imports, SABC says they were boosted by a rise in demand for motor vehicles, parts and accessories. I want us to maybe stay on the point that you just brought up about the long-term economy. We know the current challenges that we are facing. You've touched on them, the war in Ukraine, rising inflation, and the socioeconomic challenges that are affecting our economy now. In the short and medium term, where do you think South Africa's economy is going to go in terms of growth?
Unfortunately, it's going to go kind of nowhere fast. That is the real risk that we have. Until such time as we start embarking upon structural reforms that everyone has been talking about for a number of years, that the government itself has pledged to actually start implementing, and still we see those actually coming to fruition. I think the economy is unlikely to exceed a growth rate of 1.5% to 2% for any length of time. And then with regard to the structural reforms, there is continuous uncertainty as to whether we will actually see them being implemented, because within the government itself, there are different factions that fight in opposite directions and holding up the implementation of these reforms. And here we're talking about the fight against corruption. We're talking about improving the capacity of public service, especially at municipal level. We're talking about reforming the state-owned enterprises so that they can stand on their feet without having to rely on government to keep bailing them out. We're talking about embarking upon major infrastructural investment to actually provide the services that are needed in the economy. We are not actually seeing the progress in those areas. That
Dr. Jammine, my apologies for interrupting you on a very important conversation that we seem to have when we talk about the economy.